How are you, Carla?
Fine, and
I
you?
thought you were in Thailand.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, Diamond. I came back from Thailand only 1 week ago, and it was wonderful. I had a great vacation. The landscape were beautiful, and the culture so different from ours. However, I had to go through several stages during this trip. Also, at the beginning, I was excited to be there. I still had to face a short phase during which I was lost, and I didn't have my bearings. I was shocked to see how they lived on several occasions. The families lived with 10 people in very small huts on the side of the road, so much poverty in this country. Moreover, during an excursion, I witnessed the killing of a goat by one of the inhabitants, and I can tell you that I was shocked to see that. What seemed strange to me was their daily life, but at the end of my trip, I ended up absorbing their culture, and I was glad I came.
It's funny that you're saying that because uh, I've almost experienced the same thing when I went to the US at the age of 18 years old, I think. In fact, I was in a host family for almost 3 months, and I've been to those different stages of culture shock. But thanks to this, now I was able to manage way better and therefore live my year in Raleigh, where I'm currently in, differently and way better. Anyone else ever experienced something like that?
Yeah, I'm from France, and I experienced quite similar experiences, but way shorter in my experiences abroad. Indeed, I'm very often moving for a short time, like 1 week, for cycling competitions. So it's usually 1 or 2 weeks. But still, I faced some types of very fast cultural shock, if we can say. They were condensed. They were doing a couple of days for each phase, described in the process. And then once I was back home, like chilling, I always remembered the good times I spent abroad, and I always want to go back there, go like back in time. I believe our spirit is erasing bad memories and enlightens the best of our travels. So it's quite nicely done.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I was saying, I completely agree with you, Edward. I've been abroad for a shorter period of time as well, and still I did experience a bit of culture shock process. So when I went for the U.S. To the U.S. for the first time, I was so excited and just so happy to be there. And I didn't experience the frustration and annoyance part, but at some point I noticed the big cultural differences this country had compared to France. Um, and I ended up experiencing the cultural and personal issues part, where I would feel uncomfortable and somewhat not in the right place from time to time. It's only when I had to come home that this experience seemed to me like so incredible and amazing, and I felt like this place was where I was meant to live one day. And also, I have experienced another kind of culture shock, but this time it was very behavioral shock. So it's when I was in London last year. I was picking up my father's cousin's daughter from school with my brother, and so her school is located on the other side of London, so like the opposite of where her parents live. And so we went to pick her up, and we took the subway. And while on our way home, I noticed so many kids coming home by taking the subway on their own, and even though they were coming from private schools. So she explained to us that it was common for pupils to come home on their own, even though it means crossing town, and this all year long and from a very young age. So I was simply shocked to hear about it and to see it with my own eyes, a cultural phenomenon that isn't common in France. So the subway there isn't considered in France, sorry, isn't considered a safe place, especially for kids. So it may happen to see kids in the subway, but it's still rare compared to England apparently. So this is where we see that the cultural mindset can be very different from one country to another.
It's amazing that we all have experienced that type of thing in our life, I think.
Yeah.
I have another story to tell you. It's really funny. It's not concerning the cultural shock, it's more about proxemics. So it happened to me during this semester. Like I'm in Raleigh currently for the year abroad with Skema, and I'm in a residence called Stanhope, located not far from the Skema campus. So I live on the fourth floor of this residence, meaning that I must take the elevator to go down. And I was going down to go to class with two other friends who live in the same residence. And when the elevator stopped at the third floor, because the person started to go down, so we squeezed ourselves a little to let him come in, and we squeezed ourselves to let him come in, and there was plenty of space for him, like for the four of us. But this person preferred to wait until we go out of the elevator to call it back and be able to go alone. So first, we didn't really understand his reaction at the time while studying the Glocal awareness classes. I immediately understood that we were too tight for this, and that his social space was somehow distorted. So this is what we call the proxemics. So I don't know if you ever experienced that, but it was funny. Carla, I think you're mute right now.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Damien. In London, I had the reflex to kiss the English, looked at me sideways, wondering why I needed to invade their living space to greet them. In France and all Latin countries, we are used to kissing everyone to say hello, but for many foreigners, it is not normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I have to tell you guys a funny story about the time I was living in the US. I was like 16. I was there for 6 months, and I was living in LA. And it was like pretty much my first week at the school, and I was like a new kid from Brazil. I was the first exchange student, so I was already weird for everybody. But anyways, I got to fashion class, which is not common in Brazil, so I had never had any experience like that. And the teacher said we were supposed to do a project. I was supposed to create a piece of code, and that piece of code was going to be valued by all the other students in class. Okay, so I did it, and it was horrible, of course, because I had no experience with that before. And then when I received all the comments about my piece, I was like totally shocked. People were so rude in my point of view. Like they were so direct. They had no like context. They were not saying like, "Oh, I'm glad you're here. Nice to know that you're from Brazil." No, they just said like, "It's horrible." Like zero. And then I was like, I called my mom, like super sad, crying, said like, "Mom, can I go home? I don't like these people. They hate me. I'm weird and I'm from Brazil and I do a bad piece of code." So do you guys believe that how like different culture can like define how we relate with each other? Like,
Well, Maria, I totally believe you. I've been noticing the differences of actions between countries depending on whether they're high context countries or low context countries with one another time already. But for example, I've noticed while in London how discreet and reserved people are. For example, they seemed also very private and independent and didn't seem really to care about people around them and their businesses in general. And they just went on with their lives. And in a way, it wasn't snobbish of them when we could see it as snobbish, but it wasn't snobbish. And I know that staring at them in the street is something that seemed it's very offensive for them if you do that. And it's rude. And so, just it was kind of hard for me as a French person not to, look at people in the street because this is something that we're quite used to. So this can be explained by the fact that the UK is considered as a high context country compared to France. And on the contrary, in the US, they tend to be a low context country compared to France. Because Americans tend to show their reaction. They're flexible in and out groups, and yet they do not really speak their mind. So when I was there, I saw how easygoing and helpful they were, and yet you still feel like there was this barrier that, they look super, outgoing, and actually sometimes you can misunderstand their reaction. So I feel like this might be close to this little communication problem that you had, Edward. No?
Yeah, as I told you, you probably noticed that some people are always late, right? And
Yeah.
when you look at it closer, you will see most of them are from a different culture than ours. I had a friend, he was from Ecuador, so it's also South America, and he was always running late. But he was always acting like everything was alright, he was on time, and he was just chill, no problem. He was on time for his culture, but for us, he was like super late. And this guy was really nice, but in the long run, we almost had to give him a different time zone than ours for him to be on time. He was just so late. And this is related to our culture and what we are used to. In France, we are always more or less on time, but it's okay. For South America, it's really different. Somebody with 15 minutes late would be considered to be on time. So it's just
that's true, I can say.
This must be really surprising to get that reaction at first, I believe. So from a person who's late, I mean, it's kind of surprising. But I think it's also related to the concept of monochronic and polychronic actions because it appears to be in his culture to be chill regardless of the time. So I had this friend who was born in Germany and raised by Italian parents, and she had made me notice differences of behavior between cultures, her two cultures and my culture. And then as a person raised in the German culture, she tends to emphasize a lot on punctuality. When I tend to be more flexible in punctuality, just like you said, there's a difference in punctuality. She tends to put the job first as well and really focus on the deadline. When, as a French person, I tend to be easily distracted. So I focus on work, but then sometimes I get distracted. I think about what has to be achieved more than kind of the deadline, if I would say. And I do put relationship first in a way before work. So I feel like I was saying, lightness is more tolerated in France. However, because she's half Italian in her culture, it makes her tolerate lateness a little more, and she gets distracted from time to time, which differ from her German culture, and she focuses on both what has to be achieved and the deadlines. So there's a bit of difference here.
Yeah.
Oh, guys, I had a question to ask you. As we are all students at Skema, I am sure that at least one of you has already experienced the same thing as me. I have noticed that depending on the student with whom I do my group project, and therefore depending on their nationality, we don't work in the same way. For example, I often had to work with Chinese students, and each time they needed the support of their friends to work, they were very dependent on each other, while I am rather independent in my studies. I like to work alone and manage my organization. It's amazing how from one nationality to another you can be so collectivist or so individualistic. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I'm completely agree. It happened to me. It happened almost the same thing that you can also relate it to the individualism versus collectivism. So indeed, I was in a group project with two Chinese students and one American, and I have noticed that the Chinese student always put the group before like the team. But on the other end, you have the US guy was all about him. He didn't care about the group, and like it has caused some tension inside the group because it has upset the Chinese student and myself also a little bit. So yeah, it was disturbing. I think
Yeah,
Edouard, you told me about an experience like that.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I experienced it during multiple group works in Skema, also with Asian group members. It's true they really try to put the group as a whole rather than the individuals. But we can understand it through the six of Tethys dimensions. Most of the Asian cultures are rated really high notes on the collectivism.
Yeah.
Compared to others, as I'm from France and still living here, it's really collectivist in Asia. And I had an experience to share with you about this point. Teammates from my former cycling team were from Colombia, so South America also. And as you could have read in my paper, they considered me as a member of their family, and they always greeted me very kindly when I worked for them during the races. They were so nice, and it was really really good for me to feel like I was part of their family, of their cycle. But whatever, I think it's so nice to see differences between people, and that's what is great in our world. I think we would all agree on that. It's really nice to see differences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you have to add something, or I have to go? I think it will be time for dinner in France, so I'll have to cook something.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Good evening. So.